Greetings, dear listeners. I wanted to take a moment to explain this episode. It is a remix of a Season 1 episode. Season 1, we were just starting out and figuring out our sound and format, so some of the episodes were a little long and had some sound issues. In light of the upcoming release of Halloween Ends this October, we decided to remaster these episodes, fix as many of the audio issues as we could, and re-release them onto our main feed and our YouTube channel. We will be re-releasing the entirety of our Halloween franchise episodes, one a week, until we reach this year's Halloween. So hopefully this will give you an opportunity to rewatch the films and prepare for the latest installment. Finally, if you would like to listen to the original unedited and uncut version of this episode or any of the one-off Season 1 films, you can do so by going to patreon.com/horrornerdsatchurch and signing up for only $5 a month, cheaper than a subscription to YouTube Premium. Without further ado, we hope you enjoy this entry of Halloween. Content warnings for Episode 1 of Halloween, the 1978 film, include discussions of animal cruelty and mental health as depicted in the film, and discussion of the lifelong effects of trauma. Greetings! You are listening to Horror Nerds at Church, a podcast where we take a deep dive into a horror film and talk about what it can teach us about God, the Bible, and each other. My name is Pace, and I am feeling a little bit like Laurie Strode today.
Wow, that is a very strong feeling, Pace. Well, I'm Joe, and today I would have to say that I'm feeling a little bit like Nev Campbell in Scream for various reasons that are outside the realm of this episode. The movie that we're going to talk about today, we are doing Halloween, directed by John Carpenter from 1978, one of that year's most iconic movies. And Pace, I am curious. First time you ever saw this movie, what was that like? How old were you? Where were you? What were you thinking?
Halloween is one of those movies that I really did not see until I don't think I was in my mid-20s when I saw it for the first time. But I do have memories, pretty vivid memories actually, of when H2O came out, and especially I was in high school when Resurrection came out, Halloween Resurrection, and just the talk with my friends and stuff, everybody wanting to see the movie because Jamie Lee Curtis was coming back, and it was a big deal that she was coming back after she said she wouldn't. And unfortunately, with high school, with hormones going wild, a lot of the talk among my mostly cisgender straight friends was talking about how attractive Jamie Lee Curtis still was and all of those things. But like I strongly remember there being a lot of buzz about Resurrection, which is funny because it's arguably the worst movie in the franchise. What about you?
Yeah, I would have to say that my most conscious experience of engaging with the franchise, where I was able to really appreciate what it is I guess like you in high school, except with Halloween H2O. And even though that movie has been retconned out of existence, I still enjoy it, probably more for sentimental reasons than the quality of the movie itself. Yeah, but no, that was my first conscious experience. And so for us to do this episode of Halloween 1978, that required me to do my homework, fun homework. So you and me, Pace, we got to revisit the movie recently, and that was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun.
I just like initially want to say like it's still I watch this movie maybe about once a year, and every time I watch it, it still gets me. It still kind of has those scary moments. The atmosphere, John Carpenter does such a great job of building a very scary atmosphere. There are few films that really get this, that you can watch no matter how many times you watch it. It's still just as scary as the first time.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. And like I said, this is my first time being consciously aware of the movie, and for a film, that's several decades old, um, it genuinely had some good scares, and that is a testament to how well John Carpenter's direction was. Oh my gosh, it's so creepy. It's so effective and visceral. So young Michael Myers, age 6, murders his older sister who is in high school, and Michael does this while wearing a mask, right? And so
Yep.
we're for that scene, for this opening, we're seeing the murder unfold through the eye holes in the mask. And yeah.
And it's like poor Judith. Like she had the quickest sex ever. And right after, like, they were not upstairs for very long at all. And
I
then
know.
her boyfriend like hits and runs, all
I
gone, bye, leaves. And then she's brushing her hair afterwards, in that little sex afterglow. And then her 6-year-old brother comes in, stabs her to death.
Right, right. And yeah, and so what's I guess what was hilarious or what stood out for me in that scene were a couple of things. First of all, we're introduced to that trope that we're going to see over and over again, right? In other horror franchises with, the carefree teens who just want to make out and have sex. And that's what's happening with Judith, Michael's sister, and Judith has her boyfriend over.
Of all the iconic slashers, poor Michael gets stuck with a kitchen carving knife, and Jason gets a machete. Freddy gets his finger claw knife things, razors,
The
but
razors,
Michael,
yeah.
Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Leatherface has his chainsaw. We have a kitchen knife. Okay.
And we, we have a kitchen. Hey, you have to make use of what's available, right? Oh, disclaimer: please don't engage in this activity, please.
Yes,
Killing is wrong.
killing is wrong. In case you need to hear it said, because
I
if you
know.
didn't hear a podcaster tell you that killing is wrong, and that's the only thing that's going to prevent you from killing someone. Let's make it
Exactly.
very clear: killing is wrong.
Exactly. And
Um, but
what
yeah, I
I
don't think I don't think that I'm not sure. I'm not convinced he has a motivation. This is something that kind of Dr. Loomis plays on, because Dr. Loomis, who gets introduced very shortly in the film after this scene, has this really, like, he feels like he's almost in a different movie. His dialogue is like this very like eloquent gothic sort of description of this young man, Michael Myers, who is really this pure evil and stuff like that. And then everybody else's dialogue is kind of, Deborah Hill did a lot of the teenage dialogue, and it's mostly what you'd expect to hear a teenager to say in those age. So it's pretty accurate, I think. But it's like, then you have Loomis, who's like, and Michael is pure evil, kind of thing. And that was a really bad Loomis impersonation. But I think, like, I feel like the killing, I feel like that's what slashers have picked up from this movie, is that trope of killing teens because they're having sex and stuff like that. But I feel like for Michael, the killing, he doesn't see his siblings have sex. He sees his sister kind of like fooling around a little bit. Then he sees her naked, but like he already was going to kill her before they even happened. And then throughout the movie, he's just like, when he's stalking down the teenagers, when he's killing Laurie, when he's killing all of them, it just seems to be like this very like sort of evil, eerie. There's no explanation for why he's doing this. It's just he's this unstoppable killing machine. There's no explanation. And I think that that's something that we kind of retconned in, is this fascination of killers being this kind of punishment for preteen sex or for smoking pot. But Laurie's the final girl. We see her smoke pot in this film. So she's not like purely innocent like the trope will later become. And she's talking about how she wants to hook up with what is his name? The guy she's into. They mentioned his name a few times in the film, like this guy she has their sights on. So it's like, and she's completely fine with her friends hooking up. So it's like she's not this pure innocent person either. So it's fascinating to me how that kind of became the trope out of this film, even though I'm not sure that's at all the message this film has.
I just want to kind of seize on something you said earlier about Dr. Loomis and how dialogue makes it seem like he's in an entirely separate movie. I'm wondering if going forward, the Halloween franchise could take kind of a Disney and Star Wars approach and like start making spin-off movies about some of the individual players in the Halloween movie. And I think Dr. Loomis would be such a fascinating character to make a movie about. What do you think?
Maybe I'm a little bit weary of that just because we see what happens with Rob Zombie when he tries to give a little bit too much backstory for characters like Loomis and Michael, and he tries to like delve into their heads and what's motivating them, which is a really fascinating idea, I think, for a slasher film. I'm not sure if Michael Myers is a slasher you want to do that to, because that's part of what makes him so scary is there is no explanation, I think anyway. He's just that brute force. Loomis, though, I am very curious where Loomis comes from, because if he is a like what board certified him as a doctor if he is going around spouting this shit about his patients like this person is pure evil. It's like you don't say that about me. Like, what kind of doctor is he? What kind of psychologist is he if that's what he's saying about his patients? Oh my goodness. So yes, I am very curious about Loomis, and I would love like maybe that'd be a fun like novel, like this novel series about Loomis's younger years. Maybe he like worked with some of the other serial killers like what is his name, Ed Gaines or whoever that person was that the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is based off of. Like maybe that was early in his career. Like that'd be fascinating. I'd love to read something like that, I think, or even a mini series. I think like watch on Disney Plus. Like you're saying, if Disney bought the franchise, a Disney
Oh,
Plus series on there,
I,
Loomis.
and some corporate nerd talk here. It wouldn't be on Disney Plus. They would probably stick it on Hulu, which they also own. That's Hulu. Hulu's where they put the grown up stuff.
Yes.
No, but I think it's a great idea as a TV show, and they just call it Loomis. By the way, Disney or any other production company, if you're listening to this, could we get like some credit for this idea? I mean, if you want to give us money, we're not gonna say no, but like at least invite us to the premiere as VIPs. Okay, that would
Right.
be fabulous. um, I want to, and I also want to. You said something really cool a couple of moments ago about how Michael Myers' motivation may just be nothing but brute force. I love the way you put that. And there's just this theory out there that um, you can just be born evil, right? There's there's no like environmental circumstances. Like there's a belief out there that one can just be born evil. What do you think?
Yeah, that's something I definitely want to get into when we do a deep dive, because this film has a really interesting take on evil, um, and just like what it and kind of like what the human condition is. Is Michael even human? And that's kind of a question that kind of we'll probably have to keep coming back to as the film goes on, because as we continue through the franchise, because he starts kind of, when he resurrects at the end of every movie, he's going to come back. It becomes a trope for most slasher movies. It's like it becomes less and less human. But this film, like, I think great effort was taken to kind of leave that question open. Is he just this um human kid who had some sort of trauma or something to create this very violent person who, as an adult, is this violent serial killer? Or is there something, as Loomis thinks, some deeper evil sort of possession, or what is going on there? And I love that this film does not answer that question. Like, even the jumping ahead to the last scene, how you don't know, like, did Michael Myers survive? Like, he's not there when Loomis looks over the window to see, he's not there, but did he like crawl away to a bush and is going to bleed out in the bush, or is he like up and running around like nothing happened? It doesn't tell you. So that's what I really love about this film, is it just leaves those questions unanswered.
Yeah, I as long as we're digging around for, what could be the motivation, what could be the background for this. Yeah, the absence of the parents is definitely noticeable there.
That is so strange for throughout this whole damn movie. Like, you see, like, I think it's Annie who interacts with her dad, who's the sheriff, a little bit in the film, and you
Yes.
see Laurie interact with her dad because she drops off the keys at the Myers place and stuff. So you see like adults in the movie, you see them that they have parents, but then it gets to Halloween night and all of the teens are babysitting kids. It's like, where are all the parents? What kind of nightlife does Haddonfield have for middle-aged parents on
On
Halloween night?
Halloween, right. Right. And it's like,
That not a single parent to be found.
not a single parent to be found. So who exactly is handing out the candy? Because the kids
Right?
have got to be trick or treating. So, like, that is definitely, a hole in the storytelling.
But now we catch up with Loomis in the car, talking about with the nurse who's driving him about how they're going to transfer Michael, and he is warning about how Michael is this evil, he doesn't speak, all that stuff, doing his really best. Donald Pleasance really kind of hamming it up, which I think is amazing because Donald Pleasance is a fantastic actor. He was in James Bond, all sorts of stuff where he played Blofeld.
He's
But
really quite evocative. Can we also just note that while Loomis and the nurse are talking, it is a dark, stormy night.
yes, and they just like it, the way this film like just it's so interesting how they just basically turn a corner and you just see their headlights flash across the field of the people who are being in the that was
So
overturned.
creepy.
It is
Just
one of the creepiest scenes.
those figures that were just coming out of the darkness, and it's so creepy that you kind of don't think about the logic of this. Like, why are they just allowed to roam? Actually, I think the nurse pointed that out, right? I think she said, "Why are they being allowed to just roam about like that?"
Yes,
Like, it's kind of an audience surrogate question. Like, yeah, why?
right.
I think it's a fabulous coincidence that there is a jailbreak of some sort that happens at the mental institution just as Dr. Loomis is bringing the nurse there.
Yes, very very much a Hollywood only coincidence.
Exactly.
Some other stuff in the preamble that I want to touch on, like before it gets to like the more climactic, is Halloween night and Michael is chasing around and stuff. But before we get to that part, one other thing I want to touch on is Sheriff Brackett. Um, out of everybody in this movie, he's the only one that I think is attempting a Midwestern accent. I don't know if that's his actual accent or not.
Oh, see, I didn't pick that up, but good observation.
He does seem a little skeevy with Laurie. Is that just like a trope of the time, like the way adult men interact with young women? I don't know.
Right.
It's a
Or
little
was
weird.
that was it an intentional style Carpenter was going for? I don't know. Jamie Lee Curtis is kind of Hollywood royalty. The Lee is, of course, Vivian Lee. And as you mentioned, she starred in Psycho. And the Curtis is from Tony Curtis. Um, he was also a well known actor in his day, I believe. But he was also maybe not the most involved father, if I'm recalling correctly, and that might be putting it politely. Um, But I think Vivian and Jamie Lee definitely had that mother daughter relationship going on, which was nice. Good for them.
Yes. Are we ready to move into the night he comes home? That was the
Yes,
tagline of the film.
yes, yes. Let's do that.
Okay, what are your comments on the night it all goes down?
Well, there's some really good setup for that. You know, Laurie catches glimpses of him in the daylight, right? And even though it's just a testament to the direction of this movie that even in broad daylight, that was terrifying. Like uh, and I guess I should give some credit as well to whoever the actor was who was playing the body of
Nick
Michael Myers.
Castle. Nick Castle.
Ah, okay, yeah, Nick
And he
Castle.
returned. Yeah, and he returned to play him briefly in Halloween 2018 for a few of the scenes.
Credit to him for the 1978 version for really giving off authentically bad vibes for Michael Myers the night he comes home. Well, I feel like at least we're set up for that already by the daytime encounters. What
And
what do you think?
taking the care to like you said, setting up another sign of John Carpenter's great direction here is and writing to take the care to where did he get that mask? Oh, he broke into a hardware store where a hardware store is apparently selling Star Trek William Shatner masks, I guess.
And I think that's one of the most famous trivia tidbits of all.
Like it was just a Halloween mask that was made to resemble Captain Kirk for like kids to buy, and then or like for adults to buy, like you buy at the store, and then they doctored it up a little bit to look creepy and
That
like
is
matted the hair and all sorts of stuff. But
that is fascinating, and to create that iconic Michael Myers look, right?
yes, we'll have to talk about the mask as it comes up in the sequel films as we go through them because this mask is only like the mask never looks like it does in this film ever again. Like they never can quite get back to the look of the original mask. Each new film kind of doesn't quite get back to the original creepiness of this mask, I don't think, or the original look of it. Or like when we get to H2O and Michael Myers has like looks like he's wearing eyeliner. For his
Yes,
mask has like eyeliner. It's very strange, and there's a weird CGI mask. We'll get there. It's the mask is a thing. It's a whole
mind
thing.
you, this was the 90s where they were doing interesting things with long-standing franchises. Need I mention the nipples on the Batman suit?
Oh my god!
So, if they can do nipples on George Clooney, the next logical step would certainly be, eyeliner for Michael Myers, right?
Right? Now I kind of want to see Michael Myers like have like nipples protruding from his like
Uh,
overall coveralls.
yeah, no, I think you're alone there. Oh wow.
Donald Pleasance just being strange, hiding in the bushes outside of Michael Myers' house. Oh, and we have to talk about how he discovered the that Michael Myers apparently eats dogs. He was hungry.
I mean, yeah, that was interesting because as disgusting and gory, but also appropriate, very appropriate to a movie that is, I think it's a nice touch because I never thought I would be speaking on a podcast talking about how eating a dog raw is a nice touch. Yet here we are.
Yep.
I think
I'm dying. Oh my
I,
god.
I thought it was a nice touch because yeah, it answers the question of okay, Michael Myers busts out of the mental health facility. How does he nourish himself? And so by showing that he feeds off this dog, we're starting to get hints that this is not just any old serial killer.
Yeah, for sure.
I think it was Dr. Loomis who says very eerily, "It's still warm," or was it
Oh my
the
god,
cop?
yes.
I forget who, but that line was very evocative. It's still warm.
Ugh.
Right,
The whole Okay, Loomis's plan is just batshit because he's like, I'm going to hide in the bushes of the Myers house because I assume that's where Michael's going to come back to his house. And you, sheriff, go around town and try to find this man you've never seen before, by yourself, and we're not going to alert the public to it. It's like that is just the weirdest plan ever. I mean, it pays off because of him crouching around the bushes, he's able to hear when Lori runs into the street screaming, and all her neighbors close the blinds and shit.
that was a fascinating detail. And I have to admit, I spent some time thinking and possibly overthinking about that. Like, okay, you hear somebody clearly in distress, and you close your blinds.
I think that's kind of the getting to that whole like evil can't be here at our neighborhood. It's like we'd rather just. It's a very, dare say, and I say this as a white person. I think it's a very white person approach to a lot of issues is let's just close the blinds and ignore it because then we don't have to think about it and it doesn't make us uncomfortable. And it's that whole like Midwestern kind of suburban neighborhood. It's We're just gonna like pretend this is happening and it'll go
Right,
away.
right. And that's exactly valid. And what I would add to that also is just the general breakdown of community during that time, which is well documented and well researched by Robert Putnam, who wrote the classic sociological text "Bowling Alone," where he looks at the breakdown of the community, and he titles his text "Bowling Alone" because that's really the bowling alley for him is literally the last outpost in terms of community gathering. After that, society just changes radically. Um, so yeah, that really ties into how Halloween addresses that during this time in American history, the sense of community is changing quite a bit.
And I mean, I think the way the pandemic is having an effect on it is just a whole other thing that people are going to be writing about for years because of how it's altered community. But I mean, I think, like you were saying, especially in that time in the rise of the suburbs, post World War II, and you start and people there's been a lot of writing about like how people stopped putting front porches on houses and now it became backyards and people would fence in their backyard, so kind of this isolationist thing. And that's one of the themes of this film, I think, is just how isolated you can feel in a suburban neighborhood. You would think you're surrounded by houses, these nice houses, but Lori's in that street running, screaming. Nobody's coming to help her. She's alone, functionally alone in this town, surrounded by people, being chased by Michael Myers. And so it's like, and so that's something that I don't. That's an aspect of suburbia that I do not think had ever really been explored in film before this movie. Is just how isolating it can be, and I think it's hard to do.
While we were watching Halloween 1978, about the dangers of answering the phone in an age when there was no caller ID.
Right? Like the amount of prank call, and this film plays on that idea because there are a lot of movies where you get that prank call and it's like where it's like an actual the serial killer is calling you or the whoever's calling you, but it turns out at first she just hears what is kind of like heavy breathing or something, and it's just her friend prank calling her. But then the funny part though is her friend, like, she hangs up the phone after hearing it, this heavy breathing, like, is clearly freaked out. She hangs it up, and then the phone rings again, and she is scared to pick it up, but she picks it up because it's like there's no answering machine yet. Many houses don't have it. There's no caller ID, so it's like it could be her parents or somebody important trying to get a hold of her. And so she's kind of forced to answer the phone even when she does not want to. And I mean, that predates the whole millennials not wanting to answer their phone by how many years? Because I have a caller ID, I never answer my phone.
Right. I
But
mean, In fact, I just explained this morning to a classmate of mine who said he wanted to chat by phone, and I had to give the explanation that that's a nice thought. I'll get back to you about that because talking on the phone involves a lot of social energy that I don't always have. And fortunately, most of the time when I explain this to folks, they're very understanding, as was this particular colleague. But going back to what you had said about how when Laurie receives the phone call and she hears the heavy breathing, or no, she hears chewing, and it's just her
Yes, that's
friend
what it
who's
was
chewing
too.
into the phone. Yeah, it's a good setup for the fake me out later on, where in fact she hears the breathing again and thinks that her friend is again chewing in her ear when in fact she's dead.
Or she thinks her friend is having, like, calling her while having sex.
Right, exactly.
Because
Yeah.
she's like, "Oh, this is a new low," or something like that, and it's like, no, her friend is actually dying while on the phone, which
Yes,
is, like you
yes.
said, a very interesting way to bring technology in, because everybody having a household phone that is just, like, by your bedstand with the little, um, corded phones and stuff was kind of not completely new, but it was, I think that's one of the first times where, somebody's dying on phone, with their friend, and their friend hears that, and that's been done to humorous effect since then. But
Well, I mean, I'm speaking of humorous effect and the intersection with technology, as long as we're on the subject. Is it just me, or this is this suburban town very poorly lit? What, like, why was one of Laurie's friends doing laundry in the dark?
in the
What?
dark, in the backyard, like in a separate, like she had to leave her house. Well, she was baby. It was at the kid's house that she was babysitting, but she leaves the kid's house, leaves the actual house, walks through the backyard into some weird shed,
Yeah, some
goes
extension of
into
the
this shed,
house. Yeah.
yeah, and tries to do laundry there. The shed gets locked by accident, so she can't leave, and she's trying to crawl out the window, and then the kid who is babysitting her thankfully comes in and rescues her. But it's just like, what a weird, I mean, like, uh, what a weird scene, um and just kind of a weird setup of how, like, showing of going into the ways in which we get these kind of like glimpses of like 1970s suburban life in this film that I think are very authentic to the time it was made and still hold up. It doesn't feel that dated because it was done in a very thoughtful way. Whereas I think a lot of times, especially even Halloween, when we get to like Halloween Resurrection and we see, oh, we're going to do a live stream through the Michael Myers house, or even Halloween 2018, um, we have podcasters get killed in the very opening scenes of this. It's like they're really trying to, I feel like, kind of dating the film in a way that I think isn't helpful.
And yes, while the laundry room scene was very evocative, like the way the shadows and the moonlight, I guess it was, were working with each other. It really sets up the scene. But it also begs the question: why are you doing your laundry in the dark? Flip on a switch, woman.
I know. Does that room not have lights? I don't know.
I
This is very
know.
weird.
What
Maybe
is
it didn't. It's a random shit. The other point I want to touch on, before we kind of move into a more theological discussion, is just the resourcefulness of Laurie in these final few moments. Like how she, like, when you try to put yourself in those situations, you try to think of what you might do or not do differently. But the fact that she like calls for help, and then of course the phone line isn't working, I assume, which is why she doesn't call 911. The idea that, like, she's so resourceful, she is able to make sure that the kid she's caring for, well, two kids, because the one girl gets dropped off at her house, that they both are kept safe, basically telling them to stay in the room, barricade the door, that she uses a knitting needle to stab into
Yes, yes.
Michael. And then that closet scene is just such an iconic scene that's been done so many times, and so many different movies have like done their own version take on that. But it's like well, but like seeing the hangers above her, no wire hangers. This is why you have wire hangers, because she unscrews the hanger and like stabs it into Michael's eye and uses that to escape. Like just that level of resourcefulness and quick thinking that she has throughout the whole thing. And then telling the kids to then go run and get help after she thinks that she has killed Michael, but of course he's not dead, which is probably, I think, for me, the scariest moment in the film is when she sends the kids off to go get help. And it just is showing her kind of like calming down and breathing and like trying to figure out, now what do I do? And it's like close up of on her. And in the background, you see Michael just slowly get up off the floor, like sit up in this really like seamless movement, out of focus, but it's like clearly in the frame of him getting off the floor. It's like that's just so freaking creepy,
Oh
so
yes,
eerie.
I agree. I agree. It was, again, it's a testament to how, this movie was made on a low budget. They had to get really creative, and that creativity really comes through. You're really freaked out. I know I was, and like I said, I this was my first time consciously watching the movie because I'd watch it as a kid, but I don't really remember many details. From what I'm understanding, by this point in American history, 911 is just beginning to spread throughout the country. So, in fact, Haddonfield may not have had a 911 service yet at this time.
Or if it had, it was new and people didn't quite understand how to use it. Because I remember like this is a sign of like when I was growing up. I remember like in the 80s, it was a really big thing for police officers and firefighters to come into your school and teach you about 911 and this like huge public service of making sure kids know what 911 is and stuff like that, which I think was is kind of a testament to the 80s. One of the strange things about the 80s, so many strange things about the 80s, being a very young child in the 80s and early 90s. Yeah, I think the big takeaway here from me for the film is just this discussion of evil, which is something that horror movies kind of singularly are good at in our social consciousness, is just kind of tackling the question of evil in a way that most other films don't talk about. Because I think in our contemporary day, even among many religious people, among Christians, among people of any religion, there's oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes there's this reluctance to acknowledge that evil is real. This, especially in mainline Protestantism, this kind of weariness to talk about sin and suggest that sin isn't a thing, because there's been a lot of harm that's come from the church in its teachings on sin and stuff like that, especially on how that relates to like queer people and stuff like that. So lot of real trauma and harm that's been done by talking about sin stuff. So I feel like a lot of like more liberally minded religious people, especially Christians, tend to like shy away from wanting to really tackle talking about evil, about sin, about theodicy. Theodicy is a big theological fancy term, but it just basically is the question of why, if God is all good and all knowing and all powerful, why does evil exist? Why doesn't God basically just come in and stop suffering and stop evil and all that? And this film really has some interesting things about this. So one is something we've already talked about, is this evil in suburban America. So it's like, yes, evil is real, it's tangible, and it is lurking in your very neighborhood. It's something you kind of need to be vigilant about. And because if you have this isolationist thing, if you're closing the shades whenever somebody's running up for you to you for help, you're ignoring the very real presence. You're ignoring what you're saying about the community care, and that's kind of one of the things that I think is one of the messages of this film, if there is a message. But if there is any message, I think it's those two things: that evil exists and is here, but also one of the ways to escape evil is to, you know, be community for each other. Don't fall into this isolationist suburban trap of we're in it alone, and we all have to fend for ourselves. I mean, even Laurie, she doesn't ultimately kill Michael. It's uh, through the help of Donald Pleasance's character, Dr. Loomis, who comes in at the end and shoots him, and he falls out the window. Of course, whether or not Michael's dead is another question. But like, there's this. It's not like a normal final girl where she overcomes all obstacles by herself and is victorious.
I returning to what you said about community. So one of the things that I like about being a student at the Graduate Theological Union is that we learn about Scripture. We learn about our Christian faith in ways that we might not have thought of in just our everyday pastoral lives. And for me, prior to becoming a seminarian, the story of Adam and Eve and the fall was um, was basically presented as a singular. They sinned, and now all of mankind or humankind suffers. Very, very, very candid, but also very one-dimensional and without any nuance. And so it was here at the GTU that I was introduced to the theology of Professor J. Emery Johnson, who looks at the fall, not just as an affront that we did to God, but it looks at it as a lasting separation that is not only between us, humankind, and God, but also the consequences our separation from each other. Because when Adam and Eve are booted out of paradise, um, it's not easy to get along. Let's just say that in a nutshell, right? Um, their offspring. We all know what would happen there with the brothers. Um, and so, what Professor Johnson really looks at there is this corruption of our connection to each other, which is really, one of the biggest consequences of the fall. And it's not talked about as much in everyday pastoral life, but I really enjoyed learning about that theological aspect about it, because it certainly does manifest um, in the way this town behaves. The parents are absent, just randomly assuming that their kids could be on their own for the night. The blinds, as you said, being closed when Lori is clearly in distress. Um, and you could even argue that the telephone is an instrument of not of connection, but of separation, because there, like we said before, there is that one scene where Lori picks up the phone and it's impossible to tell that her friend is on the other line being murdered.
Definitely, and I think you're absolutely right there with all of that. And I would add to that by saying that even like Loomis's approach to the problem is to not bring in more help, which I think is the wrong move here. Perhaps, of course, we are living in a world where Black Lives Matter has thankfully raised to our awareness the reality of police brutality and stuff like that. And so that's real thing. So maybe bringing more police is not this solution, but the fact that nevertheless Loomis and Sheriff Brackett are like this two-man band thinking they can stop Michael Myers on their own without actually like reaching out to appropriate authorities who could help out and stuff like that, without alerting the town so they can be aware of what's happening.
Yeah, and Jesus was very, very community oriented.
Yeah, I think that's other thing I kind of want to talk a little bit more about is just that kind of nature of evil thing. But before we go into there, anything else you kind of want to talk about with community?
Yeah, no, I mean, God is God. Like I later on in scriptures, we'll see God start to kind of look for us, um, and especially in Song of Songs, where God is essentially asking, "Where are you? Where are you?" you know, and I feel like that's kind of that we're kind of at that oh, what is that called? That precipice. That that oh God, we're just on the verge of being reunited with God. And what for me Halloween is about is that moment just before when it's darkest, when we think we've lost contact with God, and we think that we have lost touch with each other. And I think what the Halloween movie 1978 does, and I think for the movies that are to come, especially through the character of Laurie, suggests that this doesn't have to be the way. Yeah, we can reestablish that connection, and of course, good can triumph um, over evil. So that's all I had to say about Community.
Yeah, and I think like as a macro view of horror as a genre in general, one of the reasons that I think it's so compelling is it kind of is that age-old tale of good triumphing over evil. Um, and so that kind of touches on the nature of evil, with Michael Myers being kind of this personification of evil as the shape, as he's called in this film, in the credits. And so it's like, what is evil, why does evil exist and stuff. And I think a movie like this is a good reminder of evil being real, palpable, tangible, all of those things. But something that's really kind of scary about the earliest film in all of the franchises is just the nature of evil to be this person who seems so unsuspecting. When Michael Myers has this scene where his mask comes off briefly and he just has this very like angelic, like, first of all, as a kid, this like little innocent looking kid, and then as a young man, his later on in the movie when his mask comes off in the hallway and you see just a very short glimpse of his face, this very like cherub almost kind of face, for a young man, very handsome, one of the handsomest people in the movie. We're joking as we're watching it about how there aren't that many attractive men in this movie. Maybe Loomis if we're into the daddy types, but like that's it.
Yes. um,
Yeah, so I guess just generally speaking, like what you're talking about is, I think the one question I have for this film, um, like theological question, is what how do we kind of, the point I was trying to get at with the franchise villains becoming kind of the antagonists of the slasher movies, is that it kind of starts to warp our view of evil to being something out there that's in the person, like Michael Myers or Jason or Freddy Krueger, and as opposed to kind of something that exists within all of us. And I think that this movie does a good job of balancing that by showing, for instance, the neighbors closing their blinds. Even with the evil of Michael Myers, there's this other evil in the town that is not really being addressed, but is still kind of being glimpsed at in the films.
but as someone who is from the Roman Catholic tradition, um, it's not hard to see Laurie as sort of a Mary figure. Mary is a good girl, who is tasked with this huge responsibility of giving birth to the savior of the world, and here's Laurie, who, as the franchise progresses, she doesn't mean to become a hero. She doesn't mean to be our last line of defense against Michael Myers, but she kind of takes that role. And I know that there are continuing discussions about Mary. I mean, there's a whole branch of it called Mariology and theology, right? Um, but in regards to Laurie, I kind of, I don't know, I kind of feel bad for her. I mean, she's introduced in the 1978 movie as a smart gal who does really well in her classes. And take the classroom scene, for example, where she is sitting by the window and she's very distracted by Michael lurking about outside the window. And yet, when the teacher calls on her, Laurie is able to give a very good answer that you could even hear the teacher is impressed by. And so I'm sure Laurie had hopes and dreams. And then there was this.
Yep. And what's really fascinating, 2 points quick, but one is about Laurie specifically, is what's really fascinating is what this franchise does to the Laurie character, because this franchise keeps rebooting itself. So Laurie has like 3 or 4 different endings of like what happened to Laurie when she grows up, and each one is kind of a different take of it. But just it really kind of, like you said, touches home on that uh poor Laurie character of like this traumatic event in her teenage years really having a lifelong effect on her, in negative ways, and all of that. And then the second point being, the connection to the Mary thing is something that I did not think of till you said that, but I think that's a
Mm,
very, very
it's
profound
okay.
point.
I'm Catholic.
Yes. No, it's a very
We think
profound
about
point.
Mary all the time.
I love this point because I
Yeah.
think I see it so clearly, especially as the final girl evolves into becoming more of that sinless, virginal character where all of her friends are out there partying and drinking and having sex. And yet, the final girl, you can almost tell right away in the film because she's the one who is kind of the prude among friends.
Another another point I want to make about the Mariological parallel. I'm sorry, I'm stuck on this. I'm Catholic. We're very stubborn. Um, if I'm remembering correctly, the discussion in the classroom with Lori and the whatever assigned reading they were talking about in that class was about fate.
About fate,
Is
yeah.
could be, yeah, and interesting. A little bit of a fast forward to 2018. Laurie's granddaughter is sitting in the classroom also having a discussion about fate. And I thought that was a really great mirroring that was done by the 2018 remake. And we know the story of the angel appearing to Mary to deliver the news of what she's about to do. And so, can you see the mirroring in that and how Laurie looks out the window and Michael is there?
Yep.
It's like a Star Trek dark mirror image for those of you who also happen to be Trekkies and are familiar with our evil opposites in the mirror universe. But yeah, like it's interesting to think of as that scene in the classroom with Lori, sitting there and she looks out the window, to think that there is maybe not a direct theological parallel, but there is definitely a theological shadow. What's our
Yeah,
scale?
our scale. Let's say out of 10 out of 10, what do we say? Jack-o'-lanterns, maybe, since the film has such a stunning use of jack-o'-lanterns in the opening credits.
Yes, this is it. This is Halloween's trademark. Oh, aside from the mask.
Yes. So out of 10 jack-o'-lanterns, what would you rate this film?
I think that when we were discussing this question behind the scenes, I had given it a solid 7. Um, but I am going to take that up a notch to 8 jack o' lanterns, um, because there's so much of it that's so strong, um, and the creativity that was able to end up on the screen despite limited resources and spray painting leaves on the ground and the like. Um, it was just amazing. And John Carpenter's um, direction is solid, solid stuff. I mean, I might be biased. Maybe you might be biased because we're now at that get off my lawn age. um, which is to say that a lot of movies now are just they're still good. To me, they're entertaining, but in a different way, in a very present day way. Which is also to say, there's a lot of flashiness where I don't think a lot of flashiness is warranted. John Carpenter, through his direction, it is very deceivingly simple, but his techniques are so make the movie run really well. And the only reason why I'm not giving it a perfect 10 jack-o'-lanterns is script problems that aren't a big deal, but they're there and they're noticeable, as folks listening to us have heard. Like, we're wondering, where are the parents? Why are the lights turned off? And so forth and so on. But yes, it is
dialogue too, I think. I mean, overall the dialogue's pretty good, but there's a few times it's like people don't talk like that.
What about you, Pace? How many jack-o'-lanterns?
That's good. I see. For me, I would rank this. I don't know. I see. I think I rank this a little higher than you because for me there are a few perfect horror films in my mind that just like stand the test of time that can barely touch. Like I think Alien is one, The Shining by Kubrick, the original Exorcist. Like they're just nearly flawless, about as good as you can get. And this one is up there for me. So I would say this one is a 10 out of 10 jack-o'-lanterns for me. Bold statement, I know, but don't worry. By the time we get to the end, I think we'll be around like 5. Halloween 5. You'll be seeing me like ranking maybe a 3 or 4. Just spoilers. But
It's coming. It's coming. It's coming. I have strong feelings about Season of the Witch.
Oh my goodness, yes. So this one near perfect. It still scares me for a movie made in 1978 to still be so much, not even relying on jump scares. There aren't really any jump scares in this movie, and yet to still be like that creepy is just like, there are very few movies for someone who's been watching horror movies since I was like 3 or 4 that can really scare me, and this is one of those. Let's see, that leads us to our next movie, which will be the sequel to this, Halloween 2, also written by John Carpenter and Deborah Hill, but directed by Rick Rosenthal, his directorial debut. So we'll get into that next time.
Yeah. And it's my understanding that Halloween 2, correct me if I'm wrong, literally picks up where the first one left off.
Yes. It is it is one of the first films, again, I think, that really just, this movie, this franchise has so many firsts, it's wild, but it's one of those that really is just a direct pickup from the first one with very little easing the audience into what happened either. It's just like a hit the ground running.
I think in terms of presumptions, this one is one of the most fabulous presumptions because it just assumes everyone in America has seen Halloween, which, you should. No, I'm just kidding. But this is how fond I am of this movie. That's it for our show. Our theme music was by Matt May, who also edited this episode. Horror Nerds at Church releases every Thursday. Please comment, rate, and subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. Follow us on social media. We're on Facebook and Instagram at Horror Nerds at Church. We're also on Twitter at HNACPOD, Horror Nerds at Church Pod. For all the latest updates about upcoming films, news, and other announcements. Until next time. Kids, please make sure that when you're doing the laundry, you have the lights turned on, because that shit just don't make any sense.